Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the word weird to me covers more than one meaning. Cool, odd, different, unique and interesting are all included. This is the second episode of Weird Tech and I think this graphics card could certainly be described by any or all of the aforementioned phrases. It's not often that we see single slot components like this anymore. Many GPUs may occupy just one slot at the back of the case, but usually the cooler will take up the width of two or more spaces. Not this thing. This is the same width all the way down, and best of all, it requires no external power connector. This, what some may call a gimmick, does mean that the price of cards like this are higher than their stock design counterparts, this 1050 Ti being no exception at the very limited number of UK retailers it's available at. Thankfully, the used market gave me an opportunity to save a few pounds once again, and the unique nature of this card meant I couldn't resist. Furthermore, it wouldn't hurt to see how the 1050 Ti holds up in 2020. First though, the specs. Aside from the looks, this one slot edition card adheres to the same standard specs of a stock 1050 Ti. It might be ideal for someone tight on space, perhaps in an enclosure where a normal cooler might touch the metal, and for those with power supplies that have limited connectors, perhaps no PCI Express connectors at all. Maybe someone who just appreciates a good looking card and has a clear side panel on their PC would buy it as well. The large single fan is quiet even under load, and the temperature idles at around 32 degrees inside my case, reaching the low 70s during gameplay. So the 1050 Ti in 2020 is still somewhat capable, though it's best suited to targeting a console-like experience in those heavy-hitting games. 30 FPS in titles like Red Dead Redemption 2 is doable with even the higher settings. The third balanced preset here combines a mix of ultra, high and medium to give you a very visually impressive experience and a somewhat playable one. 60 FPS or close to it is probably doable with either reduced settings or resolution, but I find the slowish paced nature of Red Dead 2 in third person mode means that 30 FPS feels fine, but that's just my opinion. Now to be honest, if you are considering the 1050 Ti brand new, then I'd strongly recommend looking out for the 1650 Super instead, unless the price difference where you live is significant. Here in the UK, the 1650 Super is priced quite closely to the 1050 Ti on the brand new market, and of course the 1650 offers better performance, not just the Super but the standard 1650 as well. PUBG is best played with the medium preset to secure yourself 60 frames per second and more. High may also provide a plus 60 FPS experience, but medium is the ideal way to go to make sure that the frame rate stays high in this online competitive game. It still looks great at medium though, and once again the card stayed very quiet. In fact, with all the tested games, I didn't see the temperature exceed the low 70s, which is perfectly fine for a 1050 Ti. While we are still looking at the PUBG footage, I should mention that the whole initial jumping out of the plane thing at the beginning of the game will cut this frame rate in half briefly, but when you're on the ground it will pick back up again. CSGO is of course more processor intensive, but I like to throw it into the results anyway as it is always requested, and it's no surprise that the overall frame rate will stay very high at over 300 with this configuration. Although the performance of each map will vary, there will be no problems with any of them running on this hardware. The 1050 Ti, when paired with a powerful processor, will have no trouble with Counter-Strike. Fallout 76 won't quite get to 60 FPS at medium, and even low settings will give us similar issues, so I thought that medium made the most sense as it gives us a nice combination of visual quality and performance. Fallout 76's performance can sometimes depend on your internet connection too, and I know this from my time with some pretty terrible providers. Since switching, I've seen a lot of my issues disappear in terms of stutter, and when talking about the raw performance of the game, it does okay with this graphics card and it is certainly more than playable. Next up, it's the legend that is Crysis, the original one of course. 100 FPS at high will be no problem for the 1050 Ti, though it'll be interesting to see how the imminent remaster compares performance wise. Maybe a direct comparison between the two games is in order with this card once the new version comes out. The 1050 Ti to me in 2020 reminds me of the 750 Ti a few years after launch. It was still hanging in there just fine, even with these big AAA titles coming out. I think this GPU will be very similar in terms of its longevity and popularity, especially for those who like to shop for PC parts on the used market. It's safe to say this GPU is doing far better than a 750 Ti in 2020 though, so the similarities only go so far. GTA 5 also runs with over 100 frames per second at high. All forms of anti-aliasing were off, but I'd recommend using FXAA at the very least to smooth out some of the many jagged edges. GTA still looks pretty good though, and it will still run fine on budget cards after the many updates it's seen over the years. It's always a fun one to include in the benchmarks as well, and because it's still such a popular title that runs on many graphics cards and processors, well, it's certainly worth including. For the Flight Sim 2020 test, I took off over London, a busy city which will push any hardware to its limit. I found that 30 FPS plus was doable with a 1050 Ti at low settings, though at these settings London doesn't look too much like London, even though at higher altitude it's not really a problem. This game is of course more about the flying aspect after all, and 30 FPS feels absolutely fine. Scarcely populated areas will perform better, but I'm glad to see that this card can handle the game relatively well. 60 frames per second is going to be much harder to achieve, but this is the case with far more powerful hardware too, as the game is quite demanding to say the least. Finally then, we have Modern Warfare Warzone. With the textures at high, which was ultimately causing the VRAM limit to nearly be exceeded, we saw almost 60 FPS on average with every other setting at normal. This game is still playable with the GTX 1050 Ti, and this slim single slot version, that's a tongue twister, remained quiet and fairly cool throughout. So it's a nice card, it's a nice looking card as well, but in 2020 buying one new doesn't really make too much sense because it is priced quite high here in the UK. Now this may vary depending on where you live of course, but I think the 1650 sounds like a much better decision, especially when you can find some of those without power connectors as well. And this card doesn't really offer anything in terms of a smaller form factor other than its width, so it's not going to be able to fit in those small Dell computers, for example. That being said, I do really like it. It's so lightweight as well, it feels like a toy, and yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with the 1050 Ti and taking a look at what it can do in 2020. I think Inno3D have created a really nice product here, and I'm pretty sure there are other models with this same heatsink as well. So yeah, look out for the 1650 in this model if you want one, because you could probably find that for a similar price. Although I have to say that I haven't been able to find it anywhere yet in the UK. Maybe in a few months it will become more widely available. Thanks for watching though. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.